This is Around the A, a weekly look at the top stories, news, and interviews from the NHL's top developmental league, with your hosts David Foote and Patrick Williams on the Sports Podcasting Network.
It's Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network, episode 26 of this inaugural season with myself, David Foote, my good friend Patrick Williams. Glad to have you along here on SPN and wherever else you might be listening on Apple Music, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcast. Glad to have you with us, whether you are a now longtime listener, 26 episodes in, or a first-time listener. We're glad to have you along. If you are one of those tuning in for the first time, as our little show starts to gain some traction here, we'll do a little refresher for you as to who we are. I cover the Belleville Senators here in Belleville, Ontario. I worked with the Belleville Bulls and the Peterborough Petes of the Ontario Hockey League before that. Patrick Williams is an award-winning journalist covering the American Hockey League for NHL.com. Also spent some time covering the Winnipeg Jets as well, and is now based in around the Hershey area and covers this league from coast to coast. So, lots of experience here. We've had some excellent guests through our first 25 episodes, and there's a whole lot more coming up throughout the rest of the season here on Season 1. Not an overly long show ahead this week, Pat, but we're going to dig deep into what's happening in Rochester and Buffalo, and we've got some news and notes with a lot of players, seemingly a lot of players anyway, deciding to jump ship from the American Hockey League and take deals overseas.
Yeah, you're right. We were talking off air that the news cycle right now is really kind of unpredictable. It's a little bit of stop-start, comes in bursts and then slows down. Last week was a really busy week, like you said, with Rochester and Buffalo, and 22 people fired from that operation, including pretty much everybody to do with the Rochester Americans hockey operations. So we'll have Kevin Oklobzija along a little bit later, but there's a big KHL exodus happening, obviously, doing no small part to the uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there's still news happening, even in the middle of all this, the hockey business does still keep chugging along, but it's a weird time right now. I was thinking normally we would have just been wrapping up the Calder Cup final. Yeah. This is like always sort of the busiest month of the year for me, to be honest. Typically you're coming right off the playoffs, you go into the final. 2 weeks of that usually, and then maybe you get a week or so in between that and the draft and free agency and trades and everything. So it's usually a crazy time of the year. Not so much so this year, though. And, we're trying to just figure out the new landscape here. But there is really no map to go on, and we're going to have to feel our way through all this.
Yeah, lots of uncertainty. I mean, we know for sure that the American Hockey League will not be back until next season. When next season is, that we don't know. We know the NHL is making plans to play again. When they do, that we don't know. And I think all of that uncertainty is what's leading to a lot of these guys deciding to just, maybe take a surefire opportunity and go overseas to the KHL. Some pretty big names in our league deciding to make the jump. One of them, perhaps, arguably one of the best players, if not the best player in the American Hockey League over the last 3 seasons. The news breaking this week that Reed Boucher of the Utica Comets has signed in the KHL. His teammate, Nikolai Goldobin from Utica, also heading out to the KHL, and Lawrence Pilot from the Rochester Americans, and we're going to dig into that with Kevin Oklobzija later on as well. Those are some big names to just say, hey, you know what? I've seen success here. I'm on the verge of cracking an NHL roster, but I'm not going to make that my priority right now. I'm going to go take the sure money and go overseas.
Yeah, I mean, players have that financial consideration to keep in mind. I think any year, this year especially. I mean, we talk about the 2021 season. We don't know how much of that 20 part of that will really apply. You know, if you're looking at season maybe not starting until December, January at best, I think, and I think that would be a fairly conservative estimate at this point. And the fact that apparently NHL contracts will be extended now deep into the fall, that's just throwing the entire international player free agency market, however you want to call it, really off kilter. So if you're a player who's got an opportunity to go over to Russia, and it looks like the KHL is full steam ahead for next season, you have to take it, I think. I mean, if you look at the money there, I mean, you can – a good player like, you know, certainly a Boucher, but really any player coming over here, you're probably looking at a good solid $500,000 to go over there to start. And it goes up to $1 million and a half in some cases for a really higher end player. I'm sure Boucher is well within that range. It's a sure thing. And, you know, if you're a player like Boucher, do you want to be sitting around now for 6 months, 9 months, maybe more, not playing, not earning money, you know, or do you want to go to Russia and you go over there, you play for Avangard, a really well-respected club over there, has had a lot of success in the last decade or so. Yeah, you can understand that. Same thing with Goldobin. Obviously, him being a Russian, it's a little bit more familiar territory for him than for Boucher. Highly regarded prospect at one point, never quite panned out over here. Lawrence Pilot, really interesting case, kind of a situation where well, we'll talk about Buffalo and Rochester, but just the chaos of that set up.
He may have got out at the right time.
Yeah, so that did end the way certainly anybody on either side of that equation had hoped for a couple years ago. So yeah, he'll go over there, play on the KHL style game, which is quite a bit different game. It's a little bit more of a chess match than our style over here. Which is, sometimes pinball hockey. So players are taking the sure thing. And I won't be surprised to see more guys explore that opportunity. I mean, going to Russia is a big adjustment, obviously, from just a geographical standpoint.
I was going to say as well, like it's kind of a gamble on the best of days to pick up and move continents. And, some of the stories that you hear about the KHL and Russia in general could turn some guys off of wanting to go there, but it seems like that's, I assume it's been considered, but doesn't seem to be a major factor. The uncertainty of a new country and things like that seems to be outweighed by the uncertainty of what's happening here.
Yeah, the horror stories, obviously, you've heard them over the years. I will say I've heard that, everything I know is a lot of that's sort of more in the past than it is now. They really have tried to clean up some of the issues that were problems for players, especially international players coming in. The geographies, I mean, there's no way around that. You're going to the other side of the world in some cases. If you're going to Kazakhstan or somewhere, deep into kind of the eastern conference of the KHL, where you're well into Siberia, that's a haul, and that brings with it all the lifestyle and the family changes as well. But the money's good, and money talks. And if you're a player that's maybe just looking for a little bit of a change of pace, adventure, it can be a really good fit. Some guys go over there and love it. Brandon Bochenski went over there, Ottawa Senators prospect way back when. Really had a great run of it. Nigel Dawes, another player, Winnipegger, who really found a home there. So some guys go over there and it works for them. Other guys go over there and they're pretty quickly decide it's not for them. But really, that's the same as when players come over here. Some really take well to it. Others, it's just not for them. So I won't be surprised to see more of it. And I think we're especially seeing the KHL attract a lot as opposed to some of the other European leagues where there's still a little bit of uncertainty about their seasons and about the health situation over there. So right now, I mean, it's a tough time for the AHL right now, but players are looking out for their own interests, and you can't blame them because if the old adage, if you don't, who will, right? So that's where we're at right now.
Other guys headed over, Justin Kloos and Chris Weidman, both from San Diego, are playing in the KHL. It's not a KHL move, but it's a move to Europe anyway. Frank Corrado, who spent this past season with the Belleville Senators, he's off to Modo in Sweden. And you talk about guys who go over there and seem to really excel and enjoy themselves. Former Belleville Senator, former Portland Pirate, Ethan Warwick, who also played with the Texas Stars and the Charlotte Checkers for half a season as well. He spent the last year in the KHL, but with Kunlun Red Star in China, which I think a lot of people forget that's how far the KHL stretches. And I'd spoken to him a few times, and he just loved his time over there. So it's not all bad, obviously. And as you say, the money talks, and these guys seem to be wanting to take that risk right now and make that move.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Canadian guy, you can go. It's a little different for the Americans, but Canadian guys, you don't always have to pay all the taxes. So sometimes you go to Europe and that's taken care of for you, and you can be in a really good setup. Especially if you're a young guy, if you're 24, 25 years old, and you're just looking to see the world a little bit and get some adventure. And I mean, like you said, Ethan Warwick, you go over, you're playing in Beijing. I mean, that's going to be a little bit of a different experience for people from here, and you're certainly going to see a whole different culture and different lifestyle and everything that comes with going overseas. So if you're maybe tired of riding the buses in the American League and kind of being on that bubble with the NHL up and down and having that uncertainty, I can see the appeal going over. And I mean, the KHL is big enough. I mean, geographically speaking, that odds are you can kind of find a fit if you wanted something a little bit smaller, quieter type setup. There are plenty of smaller market clubs in the KHL that can offer you that. If you want looking for adventure, there's Moscow. There's, like you said, Beijing. I mean, Helsinki. There's some big markets in that league as well. So certainly if you're looking for culture, you have St. Petersburg, Russia, one of the most beautiful cities around. So it can definitely be fun. And facilities over there, a lot of cases really have taken a step up. I mean, I think sometimes we think of Russian hockey and we think of all the old, stories from the 70s and the 80s. And, it's a lot different now, right? It's a global sport and, a lot more transparency in a lot of ways. So, I mean, it's fun. And like you said, money, not a bad deal. Go over there and maybe multiply your salary by 10 times in some cases. You can certainly see why a player would jump at that opportunity.
Yeah, a lot of money in that league. We're going to perhaps see what Kevin Oklobzija thinks of that coming up in a little bit. Longtime writer covering the Rochester Americans. We're going to talk to him as well about the fallout from the Buffalo house cleaning, if you will. 22 people losing their jobs in the last couple of weeks with an absolute front office massacre, really, in the Buffalo organization. Before we get to him, though, as much as there's this impact on the players who decide to go overseas, Pat, what about the impact on the AHL clubs? For a team like Utica, specifically, who's losing two of its top scorers, again, arguably its best player, some might say in franchise history. The voice of the Comets, Joe Roberts, tweeting that earlier on this week that he was arguably the best player to ever wear a Comets uniform as far as his performance in Utica goes. How do these teams deal with losing these star players?
Well, 90 goals for Reed Boucher in the regular season over the last 3 years. A pure sniper, a guy that's there's a dot and he can find it, from 50 feet out and hit it again. And skating was kind of always the thing that held him back a little bit, especially with the NHL now, all about speed. But yeah, you talk about hits to the lineup. Boucher 1, Goldobin 2 in scoring. Both of them gone. I mean, Boucher had 67 points, 53 games. I mean, just a guy that, frankly, was your classic 4A player, probably above the level of the American League, but for some reason, like I said, the skating most likely just was not able to make it work full time at the NHL level. But at Utica Club, they played a fun brand of hockey, and now Justin Bailey, you wonder where his future is. Sven Bertschy, same thing. Brogan Raverty, I think at some point the good young rookie defenseman will be a good candidate to crack the Vancouver lineup at some point. So yeah, major hits for that Utica Club. Which had a really nice bounce back season in 2019-20 after that really disappointing season back 2018 and 19. So, I think, trying to really prognosticate rosters at this point, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, if the NHL actually pulls off this playoff season, that might affect things one direction. But then you think about, if they don't play, where does that go, right? I mean, how many players are going to look at Reid Boucher now and see what he did and say, okay, I'm going to follow him and kind of jump ship here while I can. The AHL in the best of times really is a high turnover league. Probably, I would estimate on average, you're probably looking 40% or so turnover each season. I mean, I think it could be well above that whenever the next season does start, if there is a next season. I think we're all sort of assuming that everything will eventually get back to normal for next season, but there's no guarantees of that, both from the health standpoint, and we've talked about this before. The AHL needs people in the seats. If people are not willing and able, that's a difficult equation to square that at that point for this league. And I'm sure clubs would be looking to the NHL for some help, but the NHL has its own issues right now. So I think this is, I've used this analogy before, this is where, it's the middle of the night, you wake up, the room is dark, and you're fumbling for the light switch. Everybody's trying to feel their way through this, and the NHL included. So I don't envy any of the decision makers right now trying to get this right. And then the other thing is you do have the CBA coming up in a little bit. In a couple of years, you have the NHL television deal in the States coming up in a couple of years. So there's a lot of some really major variables staring down the NHL and by extension the AHL. I mean, anything that happens in the NHL eventually finds its way to the AHL, good or bad. And that's even more so at this case.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to see what happens. I like the looking for the light switch in the dark reference. And likely there's going to be some shins slammed off of bed frames and things like that as well, because it seems even more difficult than that at times to wade our way through this and figure out what's going on. We're going to see what Kevin Oklobzija thinks of this whole situation as well, and dig deep into the Buffalo Sabres house cleaning. Coming up later on in the show, we're going to chat a little bit about Dave Andrews as his tenure is winding down. We'll also get you the results of our conference finals in the playoff poll and see who's going to the What If Calder Cup final here on Around the A. If you follow us on social media at Around the A Pod, you might already know if you've been keeping an eye on the results, but we'll fill you in later on. But first, let's talk to Kevin Oklobzija, who's been a fixture covering this league for 35 years with the Rochester Americans. He's worked for the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester since 1985 and 86. More recently, covering the Americans for the Pick and Splinters website, pickandsplinters.com, and doing some more official writing for the Rochester Business Journal. Quite the resume this guy has, Pat. Covered 2 Calder Cups. He's dealt with some pretty high-profile names in hockey and has covered some Olympic Games as well.
Yeah, no, I remember reading him when I was a kid. He had a weekly column on the AHL and the Hockey News, and he was a big deal. And he was really kind of the first, guy I knew covering the league. Obviously, in the 90s, things were a lot different. You didn't have the same amount of coverage that you do now, and certainly not, the access to video and stats and everything and websites and all that fun stuff. So, In American League circles, he's one of the real standbys. I mean, he even goes further back than Dave Andrews, if you can believe that. So, a guy who's kind of seen everything. He's seen the evolution of this league for 30-something years, and kind of can speak firsthand about life in the AHL in the 80s when it was really kind of a whole different world from everything I've heard, kind of a lot more akin to Slapshot and a little bit more of a mom and pop operation to the way it is now, which is big money, places like Las Vegas and, and that coming into the league. And and he's had kind of almost, I guess I would call it like two chapters in his tenure in Rochester. The first half were full of success for the club. They won two Calder Cup championships. They went to the final 5 other times. We're kind of a perennial model franchise. In a lot of ways, they were what Hershey is now. And then in the last, let's say, 15 or so years, it's just been kind of one thing after another for them. They haven't had success. They've shuffled through a couple of different affiliations, and now the current Buffalo affiliation, which on paper should work fantastic, has just continued to hit a lot of road bumps. And 4 coaches in 5 years before Chris Taylor arrived in 2017, 3 coaches in 3 years directly speaking before that. You bring in Taylor, you think, okay, everything is on track now. The team's winning. They're developing players. And then this news came down last week. I think it caught everybody off guard. Apparently even Chris Taylor himself, according to the reports. And, you don't expect when you finish 4th in the Eastern Conference that you're going to be fired, 2 months later. But that's where it is in Buffalo right now. And unfortunately for Chris Taylor and his staff and Randy Sexton, the general manager there, Buffalo's problems eventually became their problems. And I think that's what we're going to have. But Kevin will be great. Kevin is nothing if not a real blunt, direct, honest guy with his evaluation of things. And I think this is one to really dig in on because I think there's a lot to unpack with this Rochester situation.
Well, let's do that. Let's dig into what's happening in Rochester and Buffalo. Kevin Oklobzija joins us next on episode 26 of Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network. Kevin, thanks for doing this. How are you?
I'm fine, and absolutely glad to talk some hockey in June when we haven't had any hockey for a few months now.
Yeah, it's been wild times everywhere, really, but specifically in Buffalo and Rochester over the last few weeks. 22 members of the hockey operations staff losing their jobs in, again, what I call a house cleaning, but what you called in your recent column an endless dumpster fire. What was the reaction towards what's happening there, and how are people handling it around the organization right now?
Most of it, like fans, for the most part, are pretty shocked. You'll find some diehards who will say, well, you know what, the Amers, yeah, they won some games. They won a lot of games at the playoffs. They were up against Toronto, and they got swept 2 years in a row. So that's what it means here. We got to win, and, the change might not be so bad. But to the casual fan who buys tickets once every Friday or, once a month on Friday or a couple times a month, they're trying to figure out, wait a minute, they won 40 games 2 years in a row, and they got rid of this guy. So they're perplexed. And, if they're that hurting for money, which, they might be, I think the first signs and the true signs of that were when they got rid of Chris Pandura, their media relations person, who was as good at his job as there is in pro sports, not just the NHL, but he was really good. If you work at a market and your team never wins, like for 9 years you don't win, all you do is lose, and lose historically, and the media guy is still able to appease players and the media at the same time, that's pretty good. It's not an easy thing to do, but he managed to pull it off. They also got rid of John Sinclair, a guy who's been in their ticket department and running tickets and kind of appeasing the public through all of this. And they got rid of him too because they made too much money. That's simply what it was. So that was a pretty good indication the cost-cutting moves were on the way. It doesn't help when you pay 2 general managers every year. They're still paying Tim Murray. I think that finally ends this year. It doesn't help to pay 2 NHL head coaches. I think they're still paying Phil Housley. They're still paying Cody Hodgson. I mean, that's on Darcy, but still, they've spent money so foolishly. Now they're suddenly crying poverty and trying to recoup, and maybe they should have done it before. But to get rid of a winning coach who had helped establish a culture in Rochester, reestablish, I should say, that he lives here. He's made his home here for 20 years now. If there's anybody who can preach what the Amber Crest and what it means to play in the city means, and build a little pride within the organization for where players are playing at the moment and in the moment, it would be Chris Taylor. And they just said, nah, we don't need that. We got to develop. They have a point. They do. But you also have to have some players to develop, and you're not going to make chicken salad out of chicken feathers.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I know what Rochester means to this league as a market. I made my AHL play-by-play debut there a few years ago in with Belleville, and I was glad that was the place that I got to call my first AHL game because of just the history with that organization, with that team, with that building, the Blue Cross Arena at the War Memorial. And as you say, a guy like Chris Taylor obviously knows that so well, embedding himself in the city after playing there and being a captain there. To me, it's just such a head-scratcher to, even with all the financial hardships or what have you, whatever they say the reasons were, to let a guy like that go is, especially with the year that he's been having, it was just so puzzling to me.
Yeah, and I mean, really, they still have to pay a coach to be here, and you're not going to just have one coach in the American League. That's foolish. You need as many as you can. Well, I shouldn't say afford, but you need 2 or 3, total, a head coach, a couple of assistants to really, enable players to get proper teaching and development time and extra time after practice and video time and all the things that go into, making a pro player now. If they want to develop. Here's the perplexing thing to me. So it's going to be about development now under Kevin Adams, and it makes sense. Padulas probably look at what they've spent here on a Scott Wilson and a Redmond and all these players and go, you know what, we're paying these guys who are never going to play in the NHL and help us. Why are we wasting all this money? Okay, so let's go to the development model or more of a development model. They're trying to tell me that Chris Taylor can't teach development, like he can't develop players? That's the most bizarre thing. So obviously you're connected to Jason Botterill. Sorry, we don't want you.
Is that what it really comes down to, is that he was a Botterill guy? And
I mean, it has to be, because I think it's foolish to think he couldn't adapt and adhere to a more stricter, this is development and this is how we're going to go about it. I mean, if they don't give you 6 veterans or 3 or whatever, if they don't give you those stud forwards that can score some goals, then you don't have them to play anyway. So I don't know. It seems very odd. Chris Taylor talks to Jason Botterill, in the morning and is told by Jason that, I'm out of here. They've, decided to move on. Good luck. Everything, Rochester should be fine. And then, late afternoon, Kevin Adams calls Chris Taylor and says, yeah, we had to get rid of Jason Botterill, and yeah, by the way, you're also going to be gone as of now.
And by all indications, Chris Taylor had no idea that this was coming down the road, even after Botterill's.
He did not, because, I just think he looked at the whole picture and understood, yeah, I was hired by Jason, but, we've really got this program in Rochester turned around. Guys bought in. The players that were sent here that had to get better did get better. Victor Olofsson is an NHL offensive player, but there were some deficiencies, and there's a reason, he didn't ever go up last year. He spent the whole season of 18-19 in Rochester, and then, started up there right off the bat. But, last 2 minutes of the game, last 3 minutes, whatever, last minute with the team ahead, he wasn't on the ice. So those deficiencies would have been exposed even more. And even as an older player coming over from Europe at 23 or whatever he is, 22, 23, I mean, yeah, he was a little more experienced, but he still had things to learn. and did so. Jacob Bryson came a long, long way this year, and whether he's ever big enough to make it in the NHL, probably can do it because of that player is now allowed to play the game. But he came a long way. So players that had some skill and NHL potential did develop. Guys like Sean Malone, who may never play in the NHL, they also came a long way. Their games improved. So I guess, if you're connected to somebody, they can take you a long way, or they can also mean you're out on the street if you're too connected to them.
That you made an interesting point that you still have to pay a coach. And so if you're not paying Chris Taylor, you're going to be paying somebody. If you're in ownership's shoes, if you can put yourself there, what would be the case for firing Chris Taylor?
I get at least 8 seasons in a row of losing before I have to win.
Well, it's the old expression: we finished last without you. With you, we can finish last without you, right? So, but what would be the case though to get rid of a Chris Taylor if you were trying to play devil's advocate there?
Just that he came in from Pittsburgh with that whole group of Jason Boswell, of Randy Sexton. And they did build a team that had a lot of, quite a few veterans, more veterans than the AHL allows you to play, so they were scratching 1 or 2 every night. But that was all part of, a broader plan that worked in Pittsburgh with, Wilkes-Barre and developing younger players that, even of some of those veterans, the right guys, and Nathan Page, who, has made his home in Rochester and is in the twilight of his playing career, but still worked, with guys as an unofficial assistant coach. So I can't come up with any logical reason that you would get rid of him other than the fact he was a Jason Botterill hire, and those hires were in place in a system that relied on veterans, so we're just going to move our own. I mean, Kevin Adams may come in with the best young development coach that hockey's seen since John Cooper or whoever, and it may work great. But to me, there was nothing wrong with what was happening right now.
And then when you look at it in the sense 3 years ago, the message coming down from Buffalo was we want to build culture, we want to build winning environments. Now 3 years later, you blow that up. That culture apparently no longer matters. Why such a sudden shift?
Well, I think part of it is the economics. That they were paying, a lot of money for some veterans here, and if you don't have to pay, I don't know what they'll save on payroll here, say $3 million. I don't know, but I guess it's money they're looking at. Why would we waste this if we don't have to? So let's try the other model. And other organizations have tried it. For some, it has worked. I mean, that Belleville team was pretty young this year, and they were fun to watch, but they also had a lot of good young talent. So I don't know. I don't see the pipeline of young talent, overflowing right now. So I'm not quite sure who's going to, lead these players, and also how many are going to be jumping to the NHL anytime soon.
We're chatting with Kevin Oklobzija, who has covered the Rochester Americans for a long time. You talk about replenishing that pipeline when you've let go a lot of your main scouts. I wonder how you do replenish that pipeline, because for a lot of teams, it takes a lot of time to develop a trust in your scouts and to back their decision making when they're telling you what players you should select. How far in the hole is this organization right now from that standpoint in trying to rebuild that prospect pool?
I think they're a ways off. Casey Middlestat, maybe he'd be NHL ready and ready to make contributions next season had he come to Rochester out of the University of Minnesota. But, his deal was, and he thought he was better than he was, or is, his demands were, I will sign a contract only if it's to play in the NHL. I will not play in the American Hockey League my first season. And so they couldn't send him here. And they couldn't even send him here for the playoffs, which that experience would have helped him. So, some mistakes were made by Jason Botterill in that regard. And some draft picks, they missed on, but he should have one class in the NHL right now. He's had 3 drafts. So you should have one class in the NHL. And if your first rounder was really good, maybe they step in. But just if they keep firing the GM every 3 years, how are they ever going to get any continuity in the system? At least they did keep Kevin Devine. I think he's a very good judge of talent. He's been with the organization since Darcy came in. So, it's a long, long time ago. He's had a variety of roles. So I think that's at least a one key keep that, at least brings some semblance of consistency and normalcy to scouting when so many other guys were let go.
We were chatting earlier on in the show about Lawrence Pilot and a few other guys who are headed over to the KHL. Curious as to where you see Pilot's mindset, I guess, in making that decision, and maybe just overall with guys who are jumping ship to the KHL right now, because it's some interesting timing, I think, to be making a conscious decision to get out of the American Hockey League and go overseas.
Yeah, I think, he came over. He was really good in the room. He was a good teammate. But, I think he did make the move over here to play in the NHL. And I think, when he got a few chances last season, I think he evaluated where he stood and decided, well, if they think I'm a number 7, I just don't want to keep playing in Rochester. So I don't blame him for that. I see that logic, and, he can probably go to the KHL and make more money. So he gave it a try. It didn't work. If he was going to be the number 5 guy in Buffalo, I think he stays, or number 6. But he may have believed he was. Ralph Kruger didn't slot him there. And, I just think he decided, let's just go back to Europe and I'll make more money in the KHL.
How much of a risk to the Amerks are all these problems? We know all too well how problems in the NHL level eventually find their way down to the American League team, especially with the Amerks trying to rebuild that fan base there. It's not quite what it was back in the glory days.
No, and, there's people starting to, well, for one thing, the Pagulas operate the arena here. So they're in charge of, any profit they make at the arena is theirs. The losses are also theirs. So, they're not paying rent for the hockey team to play there per se, though I'm sure their books say they pay quite a healthy chunk of rent. If you're a smart business person, you have 2 different companies, one running the arena, one is the hockey team. You're going to charge the hockey team, a nice penny in rent to offset, to create some losses. I'm not a business expert by any means, but I'm sure that's, part of the equation. But they run the arena here. I'm not sure how long the contract is for. There's already people saying, well, they're just going to move the team to Buffalo and have them play in the Harbor Center. Well, I think the NHL is done trying that. It works in Toronto, but Toronto's a different market. It's certainly not going to work in Buffalo. They can't sell tickets to the NHL. They're not going to bring a product that is a cheaper product as far as ticket prices go and entice people to maybe go watch that team and not buy the NHL ticket. So I don't see that ever happening, but they had some momentum at the box office going, and Fridays were a good sell again. I'm wondering where the American League goes, where now they're not going to start till December or January next year. That's tough for some of the independent teams. I don't know if they can all make it. I don't know what happens.
Some of those are your best franchises, though, right? Your Hershey's, your Charlottes, your Providences, Milwaukee's. Where do you see it going?
In Syracuse, it's probably okay, but, Syracuse is one of those teams that I don't think they voted for cutting the games to 72. So whatever they're trying to get to have one league that plays the same number of games. I think they rely on every game they have because of the sponsorships they sell, and that per game average dollar that comes in from that. Chicago, the same thing. They need those games. The owner may have deep pockets, but he also doesn't want to, lose more money than makes any sense for his pleasure of the team and whatever.
How would you characterize the Rochester, I guess I would say the fan? What is the fan mood in Rochester right now? Kind of sitting back, watching all this, and really sitting back for the last 15-something years through what's been a lot of downs, a lot more than a lot of ups in that time.
They haven't won a playoff series in 15 years. I think this would have been 16. The last playoff series win was in 2005, the first round, and then the year they actually finished the regular season with the best record and lost to Manitoba in round 2. Jason Pominville got hurt, Thomas Vanek got hurt, so they lose a couple key bodies in that series, but regardless, they haven't won a playoff series. There's no other team like that in the league. Like, that's absurd. They've been in the playoffs a lot, but they haven't won. So, fans see that, and they're, like you said, it's not like the old days. And right now, it's the Sabres town. They came here under Tom Golisano's ownership with a pretty strong marketing move and tried to create, as the Buffalo Bills did, a Sabres base in Rochester, and it worked. The Amherst former VP of operations or business operations, Rob Kopaz, was actually one of the people who did that, and he would sometimes, joke that, geez, I'm one of the reasons the box office isn't booming right now because we were so successful, marketing the Sabres here. It's a Sabres town where if the Amherst do well, people are happy and start to come out again, but, it's the Florida-Buffalo co-affiliation created some very lean times, and then when Florida took over for 3 years on their own, interest really waned. So, they've rebuilt that. The Sabres are, back again, but they haven't won here, and because the Sabres, have been so bad for so long, it's tough to maintain, the interest for some of the fans. And as good a hockey town as this is, people find other things to do if they're not seeing an entertaining winning product.
You hear fans, I've heard a few fans mention the quote-unquote Amherst crest and what that means and the winning tradition. How much does that risk getting lost permanently and even just sort of getting absorbed into the Sabres? If this doesn't turn around now, and just really if you bigger picture, you look at where the hockey world, the entertainment world is going, it's a lot harder for teams now to have that tradition.
Very much so. And, the Rochester Red Wings are the AAA baseball team here, Minnesota Twins affiliate. And, they do well. They do very well, I think you could say. But people go to that ballpark, Frontier Field, nice, outdoor venue, and they go there because, for one thing, they're outside and you're with your friends.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to stand outside and ask people at the end of a game what the final score was, and I bet 40% couldn't tell you. Yeah, they're probably pretty sure who won based on when they're leaving. Okay, we're leaving before the bottom of the ninth. Yeah, the Red Wings won. But if you're a hockey fan and it's February and there's lake effect snow and it's 14 degrees outside, you're leaving the house because you are going to watch a hockey game. And that's the only reason. And they haven't had that reason for too long. Too easy to turn your TV on and watch the Sabres or whatever NHL game you want to watch. And when you look up at the arena in Rochester and can't find a banner that says anything about a championship, a championship since 1996 and even a playoff series win since 2005, that it is the pride in that crest and the meaning in town has waned. You see a lot of bumper stickers, a lot of window decals, a lot of hats with the Amherst logo, which is still a pretty cool logo. Don't see very many of those anymore.
At its peak, what was that Amherst culture, brand, whatever the buzzword is to fit?
The peak of the team was, when people said they were probably the fifth and or sixth best team in the stretch of the 60s. But, when with marketing and everything and the crest and what it meant, when I got here in 85, I moved here from Minnesota, and that was really the midst or the first couple years of really building that. The Mike Keenan Calder Cup team of 82, 83 really captivated the town. There was a parade and, thousands of people in the streets for this, championship, Calder Cup championship parade, the first championship they'd won since 68. And that carried through. They really, this was the Amherst, and the Knox brothers as owners of the Sabres took a lot of pride in that, and they wanted a winner here. I've been told many times that it stung when they were criticized for not putting a good product here. And that winning pride in the crest that even John Van Boxer preached it, and John Tortorella followed right in suit, and he preached it. But just the way the game's changed, it's tough. It's tough for fans to grasp an American League team now when you don't know who's playing. Like the casual fan knew Chris Taylor. They knew Jason Botterill. They knew Jim Jackson in the late 80s, early 90s, Richie Dunn, because they played here for 4 or 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
If you have a guy that plays in your town right now 3 years, that's a long tenure.
Yeah.
So you lose that aspect of familiarity, and then the younger guys go through so quickly they have no chance to even understand what the city and the team is about. So to ask them to feel pride in a crest or a team and to understand the tradition, it's almost unfair to do so. They're told they're going to be in the NHL next year, so that's what their focus is, and it should be. So I think it's a different game, and in many ways, the American Hockey League is like AAA baseball. You're just selling an entertainment, and the game hopefully is more entertaining than the other things going on in the arena.
What's next for the Emirates, and what's next really for Chris Taylor in terms of where does he go from this point forward?
I don't think Chris will have any trouble getting a job. I think he's well respected within hockey. I don't know what the Emirates do coaching wise here. I'm very interested to see how Kevin Adams proceeds and what. Like I said, he may come up with this great young coach who's so good at development. People forget about Chris Taylor and however this went down. For the sake of, the Sabres and the franchise here in Rochester, people should hope that's what happens. But I don't know. I'm not really hearing how they may proceed. The one move they could make that would actually, instantly put it over the top would be hiring Brian Giunta. But he has no interest in coaching right now. He got out of the game, even if it's time, it was time to leave the NHL as a player. He still wants to watch his kids grow up. So he's not coaching the Emirates. That's not going to happen. Where they go, how they find someone to come in and, appease fans and, make it all work, I'm not sure.
If they do successfully develop, but you're not winning, what does that mean for the Emirates and for their fan base? Because fans don't pay money to watch players develop.
Again, and that's AAA baseball in many ways. You're trying to, in some cities where you have no control over the roster, take pride in, remember when he played in here? Remember when, Calder played for the Red Wings? Whoever it may be. Byron Buxton, now he's with Minnesota. This is great. And it doesn't, Emirates fans really don't care that Thomas Vanek played here. It was great that he did. Scored 42 goals, but they lost in the second round. Win for us.
Let's maybe just finish on a general question about the league, Kevin, as somebody who's covered it for so long and given the unprecedented circumstances that we're in right now, how do you see the American Hockey League coming out of this? What do you expect things to look like? Do you have any thought on that when we do get back to action?
I'm a little, worried what does happen. Again, I don't know. I'm glad that, that this task force, the league put together of, 8, 9, 10, club executives and Dave Andrews, who's never going to leave. I mean, he's not president anymore. Now he's just the head of this task force, which is great because it's the role he's had and what he's done for the league. Any experience they can draw on and any help they get from it is good. But I'm not sure, are fans going to be all excited? When do they start? Do they start in December or January? Are they going to be all excited for the season opener? Whenever that is, and then is it another shortened season? I don't know how they get through this. I think, they're going to need some pretty substantial help from their parent teams.
Yeah.
So and for the teams that are owned by the NHL team, I guess this is all just part of a big budget, but for the independent teams, and they're still 10 or 11 or 12, or I don't have the count in front of me anymore, but I don't know what happened.
Yeah, lots of questions for sure still to be answered. We appreciate you trying to clear that up and definitely clearing up a little bit of what's going on with Buffalo and Rochester. Kevin Oklobzija, thanks so much for this.
Absolutely. Good talking to Mike.
Episode 26 of Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network with David Foote and Patrick Williams. Thanks to Kevin Oklobzija for his insight into the, as he put it, endless dumpster fire that is the Buffalo Sabres front office right now. Always nice, Pat, to get some insight from somebody who has covered this league for so long and been with one team for so long and is able to really give you that kind of, real solid perspective as to what's happening in that organization.
Yeah, that context, I think, is really important. He's seen the best and the worst for that franchise and for that affiliation. He's seen the glory days, the John Tortorella days in the 90s, and he's now seen sort of these real down times. So when Kevin says something, you definitely sit up and listen because he has that perspective and he has that, he knows where to sort of, how to arrange this in terms of just how bad it is or how good it is in any given situation. So, like you said, Kevin is he's very expressive in his writing. I think that would be a fair way to put it. And he did not hold back in his column last week, and it really didn't spare any prisoners there. But it's a situation where it's the same thing in Buffalo. The mood there now is really sour. And the sad thing for Buffalo fans is, that's a great hockey town. And that's certainly a situation where there was so much optimism, back when new ownership came in back in 2011. And there was really a sense, okay, we're turning the page here. This, incoming ownership group has money and they're going to invest. And they have. They put investment into the hockey side of things and the facilities and everything that goes with that. But it just hasn't worked. And, it's sad because Rochester, and like we said, anything that happens in the NHL finds its way down to the AHL, and Buffalo's problems have become Rochester's problems, and it's really hit one of the best markets traditionally in the league, the second oldest franchise in the American League, a team that goes back to 1956. It's hit them hard, and it hit a guy like Chris Taylor hard. He's somebody who has been living in Rochester for over 20 years. Really kind of committed to the franchise, played there. He was the captain there. He knew what that franchise was about. He knew what that affiliation was about. There was a lot of optimism when he came in there, and he did a good job. That's the crazy part. It's not like he came in and fell on his face. He did everything you want him to do. He'd been up with the NHL club for the first 2 months of the year as an assistant coach when Don Granato was out, and came back to Rochester in December, went to the All-Star game in January. I still remember talking. We had a good long chat at the All-Star game in Ontario, and everything seemed great. And obviously, this whole situation hit with the COVID-19 pandemic. But, there weren't many coaches I would have said were more secure in their job than Chris Taylor and his staff based on what they had done, winning-wise and development-wise. And yet he's now one of two coaches out of a job, joining Mike Stothers. I think both of them absolutely will get another opportunity somewhere. If you're looking for or coaches who have that kind of that old school foundation, but have really worked to adapt to the new world and today's player, those are your guys because they have that. They have those values of the old school, but they know how to massage and deal with the personalities that come with today's younger prospects. So somebody's going to get a good coach at some point, and I think it's Buffalo's loss because coaches are hard to find, especially coaches that really get what you're trying to do. And but they went for the complete purge there, and 22 people, like we said, out. And, you feel bad for all them scouts, coaches, everybody, general managers, because trying to find a job in hockey right now is going to be extremely difficult. Yeah,
and we had a good chat with Chris Taylor earlier on in this season of Around the A. You can find all of our old episodes by visiting sportspodcastingnetwork.com or hit the link on our Twitter page at Around the A Pod. And while you're listening, don't forget to rate and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode moving forward. Tough times in Buffalo and Rochester, and thanks to Kevin Oklobzija for breaking that down with us here on episode 26. We want to talk a little bit about Dave Andrews and his tenure winding down in just a bit, Pat, but why don't we get to our What If playoff poll results first? It's pretty easy to break down because we were down to the Final Four. Again, if you're tuning in for the first time, we, a couple weeks back, decided to take a look at what might have happened if the AHL had followed the same protocol to return to play as the NHL. We've had fan voting on our Twitter at Around the A-Pod, and we got down to the Final Four. It was Belleville and Hershey in the East, and Milwaukee and Iowa in the West. And let's start in the West, why don't we? Because the Milwaukee Admirals continued their absolute rampage through the conference. They had about 86% of the vote, so they will be on to our virtual Calder Cup finals. And the Belleville Senators are going to get through there as well. They narrowly get by Hershey with about 59% of the vote or so. We knew that would be a bit of a tighter matchup, I think, from the fans' perspective, than the Milwaukee-Iowa one. But a final here, Pat, that if things had actually gone on, in some people's minds, could have happened. We could have seen Belleville and Milwaukee battling for the Calder Cup.
Oh, absolutely. I think you had every reason to think it will start in the West. Every reason to think Milwaukee would end up in the final. Fantastic regular season, 90 points, 41 wins, led the league in both categories. Developing players, winning. I mean, it's the dream setup. We had Carl Taylor, head coach, last week on the show, and coach of the year as well, and just did a phenomenal job. Goaltending, Troy Grosnick, and then a reclamation guy in Connor Ingram coming over from Tampa Bay. Two of them had just outstanding seasons. This is a team that deadly in the power play, excellent on the PK. They know how to put the puck in the net. They also know how to play defensive hockey. I mean, they really check every box you could want. And, in our tournament, they've blitzed through Grand Rapids, Colorado, and now they get past Iowa. So now they face Belleville. And I think the interesting thing there is Belleville, in some ways, is similar in the sense that they can put the puck in the net. Highest scoring team in the league this season, 3.71. Some real dynamic prospects, obviously. Drake Batherson, Alex Formanton, Josh Norris, another past guest on this show. Head coach Troy Mann, who was with us a few weeks back. They're not quite as tight defensively for sure. And they were a team that in our tournament, they actually grabbed that one seed away from the Providence Bruins early on, and then just found their way right past Syracuse, Utica, and then the Hershey Bears are real solid clubs. So it's a real fun matchup, a little bit of everything. And the old saying, styles make fights. So you have a real defensive juggernaut in the Milwaukee Admirals up against a potent team like offensively like Belleville. Should be a fun series.
It should. And again, you'll be able to vote on who you think should win our What If Calder Cup at Around the A-Pod on Twitter. We may throw up a poll on our Instagram as well at Around the A-Pod because it's the finals, so we got to go big. I'm interested to see who comes out on top. Again, the Milwaukee fans have been incredible throughout the course of this entire thing, and that really plays into why they've been so successful in our what is essentially a meaningless tournament, but it's been a fun experiment over the last few weeks as well since hockey shut down. Let's talk a little bit about Dave Andrews now, Pat. His tenure is officially winding down. He's still going to be involved in the league as an advisor, and he's going to lead this return to play task force that we talked about last week on the show as well. So, losing the big job, if you will, but still, I think, to the absolute benefit of this league, going to be involved in a pretty big way.
Yeah, I mean, if, you don't envy Scott Howson, the incoming replacement for Dave Andrews, having to inherit everything given the current pandemic. But having Andrews around, I think it's going to be a real big step for this league. You really need somebody with that institutional background and knowledge and that ability. He's a deal maker. He knows how to get two people in a room and get them to agree on things and see where they do have common ground and then work over some of their differences and hammer out a deal. That's why this league's always had labor peace. That's why they've always been able to overcome a lot of business challenges, changing landscape in terms of entertainment options. And then certainly the biggest victory of all for him was way back in the 90s when he decided the future of the AHL was going to be player development, and it made the AHL indispensable. And that's what would get them through a lot of difficult times. That's what will get them through this current pandemic, because they are absolutely vital to the NHL. 85 to 90% every year of the players in the NHL have come through the American League. Pretty much all your goalies come through the American League. So this is a league that made itself a necessity for the NHL, and that will serve them really well. Andrews has that background, and you look at all the things that he's achieved in his time, that IHL merger back in 2001, or I should say the acquisition, and then obviously the West Coast move in 2015, which has been a huge success. San Diego, Ontario, some really strong markets out there now. Las Vegas coming in as well. And just really professionalized the league in a lot of ways, off the ice, business-wise. It became a much more sophisticated operation. He always tells the story pretty much every year at the All-Star game of when he started back in 1987, Edmonton Oilers affiliate, first in Halifax, then in Cape Breton. How the business back then was basically you put an ad in the newspaper and you put a sign up on the marquee out in front of the arena, and that was pretty much your marketing. And now it's so much more sophisticated. You have social media, you have a lot of the business analytics, and the AHL's been at the forefront of a lot of that. So having him stay around for a bit, I think really is a huge victory for this league. I mean, this league's his baby. As much as I think he is ready for retirement and ready to pull back a little bit, I think he also, this league is not just a job for him. It's really been like most of his life's work and his passion, professionally speaking. So it'll be really good, I think, for him as well. Not so much maybe of a abrupt end. You can maybe ease a little bit into retirement a little bit more slowly. It's a good step, I think, and they're going to need a lot of help. That task force has its work cut out for it, and they need somebody like Andrews. Keep it on task, keep everything on the right path, and make sure that the interests of both the NHL and the AHL are looked after.
And if you want to learn more about what it's like working with Dave Andrews and negotiating with Dave Andrews, head back to episode 22 of Around the A when we had Larry Landon on from the Professional Hockey Players Association, and he talked about just that, what it's like to work with Dave Andrews for so many years to try to keep the best interests of the league and the players in mind. And you know what? We're going to find out again a little bit more about the career of Dave Andrews and maybe what's to come as far as that return to play task force goes, because he's going to join us again next week, Pat. It's only been 5 or 6 weeks since we had him on last, but the timing is perfect to have Dave Andrews back again, and we're really looking forward to that.
Yeah, we were really hell bent on getting this interview, and we knew there was so much more to talk about, and obviously our previous interview was very much more in the current event side of things. Okay, it was right after the league officially shut down for this season, and the what's next question, everything that fans were wondering, and frankly in some cases we were wondering. But now this will be a chance to take a little bit more of a big picture view of things. Look back at his tenure, 26 seasons in his current role. Kind of a little bit of a trip down memory lane in some ways, and then like you said, the task force and everything that comes with that. So, he's a great talker. He filled up 45 minutes without even missing a beat in our previous interview. With Dave, I've learned you turn on the microphone and you let him go, because he'll give you all the insight you could ever want. He's always been really open about sharing the inside, really kind of like a look inside this business. It's a fascinating business in so many ways because it's a little bit of everything. It's hockey, it's business, it's government, it's politics. He has a lot of different constituencies on his plate. He has to make them all somehow fit together, and he's often willing to give you a peek behind that curtain on the record, and that's rare in this business. So, Yeah, Dave is kind of in that last home stretch, kind of like, when you're in school at the end of the year and, you're just looking forward to summer break. And Dave will finally get a little bit of a chance to earn some well-deserved rest. But like we said, on the other hand, still has this task force job. He's going to be chairman of the board as well for 3 years. So we'll still have him around in the American League, which will be good, because there's going to be so much change coming ahead here the next 3 to 6 to 12 months. And it would be nice to have at least a little bit of familiarity and stability in this league. And Dave is, when I think of the American League, I think of Dave and vice versa. So it should be a fun interview for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be great. You're not going to want to miss that episode 27 of Around the A-Pod coming up next week. And if you're looking to fill the time in between this episode and next, with so much going on in the world of sports, specifically the issues of race, obviously, at the forefront right now with everything that's happening in NASCAR specifically, but in other leagues too. And, of course, COVID-19 impacting sports everywhere. Our friends over at the Scrum, Tristan D'Amour and Julian McKenzie, have taken some more time to dig deeper into those issues, some issues that we haven't really touched here on this show, but they're getting into, and I would, as I did a few weeks ago, implore you to head over to the Sports Podcasting Network, sportspodcastingnetwork.com, and listen to the latest episode of The Scrum. In fact, all the episodes of The Scrum, because our pals over there doing some excellent work. And, of course, soccer is back in full effect. So Kev Laramie, the head honcho here at Sports Podcasting Network, he and Dwayne Rollins have soccer today, every day at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So if you need your soccer fix, you can tune in with them as well. Lots going on here at SPN as we head through this slow time in sports. But again, while the AHL headlines, Pat, might be slow, things certainly heating up elsewhere. So there's lots to listen to.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the Scrum podcast. We had Julian on it feels like a million years ago. It was, I think, back in November. But Julian's a pro, and I would highly recommend, like you said, tuning into that.
SportsPodcastingNetwork.com. You can find the links to all of them. And, of course, on the social media as well, all of our affiliated shows here on SPN. And, again, that's all to fill the time until we're back next week with Dave Andrews. And we cannot wait to dig deep again with the outgoing president and CEO of the American Hockey League. For now, we'll say goodbye. Episode 26 in the books. Thanks again to Kevin Oklobzija for his time and insight into the Buffalo-Rochester situation. And, again, Dave Andrews coming up next week. Hope you've enjoyed this week on Around the A, and we will talk to you next on episode 27 on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Thanks for listening to Around the A. Be sure to tune in again next week. Find Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Interact with us on social media. Give us your thoughts using the hashtag AroundTheA and follow us at AroundTheA Pod.